Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Barry here with Moss Pawn and Gun. Well, just kidding, just Eric here. But I figured you guys would like to hear that. Okay, I wanted to make this video because I read some recent comments where people were talking a little bit about Barry, my old co-host, and you guys probably remember, the Gun Gripe series and early on a lot of the stuff we were doing in the shop. And I thought it might be an interesting opportunity for me to elaborate a little bit on what type of guy Barry was, and some of the interesting stories I have about him, and that sort of thing. And Barry was a very awesome guy, and I knew Barry for a long time before we ever started filming YouTube videos together, or before I ever even started working at Moss up there, at the pawn shop. And it's just really interesting to look back on some of the things that we went through together. And I used to go in the shop as a customer myself up in Moss there, and Barry would always be around, and he would always be this really colorful person, and you could always tell that he was just a very interesting sort of person. And as I began to work there and be around him a lot more, I realized that wow, there were many shades of Barry, many layers to the Barry onion, if you will. So I want to take today's video to tell you some stories. Okay. Now, as some of you already know, obviously Barry has long been gone. He's passed away, but he was an amazing, and still is an amazing fixture of the channel. And he was a dear friend of mine, and I really enjoyed the time that I got to spend with him and some of the things that we got to do together. And I thought it'd be fun to elaborate on it. So, it's kind of interesting. Everybody looks at Barry as this sort of scholarly figure, and yeah, he was one of those kind of people that was always like dripping with wisdom. Everybody has that random like uncle or grandfather or somebody like that, some male in their family that just seems to be this sort of old wisdom kind of person. And it's either in the form of the old family member or uncle that knows everything about everything, and it just seems that no matter what you ask a general question, they're always going to have this crazy elaborate answer, and they're going to drop some knowledge on you, and you're really surprised that they know these things. And Barry was kind of like that with firearms. And I know that some of you who were raised in the 80s, okay, you probably have a random family member that was like the anarchist cookbook type of uncle or something, who always seemed to have some dark thoughts going on and everything like that. And Barry was a dark thoughts kind of guy. He was actually quite a dark guy. He had a very dark sense of humor, a very morbid sense of humor. And some of the stories that I'm going to tell you, and some of the things that we've been through together that I'm going to elaborate on in this video, we're going to reveal some of those dark sides that Barry had. And I tell you, he was always in his head. He was always walking around and sort of mumbling to himself, talking to himself. And we used to think that was such a strange behavior, but he was just such a brilliant guy. He was just always sort of narrating his own little world in his head all the time. And it was a very odd trait to observe. But I'll tell you, working at the gun counter with Barry all those years, and I worked there for quite a while before I ever started trying to make YouTube videos or anything like that. That sort of just came later. I would bring the camera in and just kind of like, let's just make some videos. And I would make a few videos, and then Barry sort of just naturally came over and just got in front of the camera. He was just a guy who was not afraid to get in front of the camera, and he loved to talk and engage with people. And it seemed like a natural progression. I was like, well, all right, Barry, well, come on over. And we started, making these videos. And I thought it was just really an interesting outgrowth, and we had a great time with it. And you guys might remember one of the early gun gripes we did where we broke the phone. Okay. So the phone was always this point of contention. The phone would ring at the shop, and Barry would pick up the phone, and it would always be like, okay, if I went and I got lunch, for instance, okay, so the funniest thing, it was just the oddest behavior to observe because it was so freaking funny, right? I would go buy lunch, and sometimes I would go get like a couple of big old bags of Mexican food to go, or I would get some Chick-fil-A or some McDonald's or whatever at the time we were eating, whatever the heck we could get our hands on at the time. But like, if you get Mexican food to go, right, okay, and you don't eat it immediately, you know how it's kind of ass? You know what I mean? Like the tacos get soft or whatever it may be. Like, certain types of food you kind of have to like consume immediately. Kind of like, or if you get fried food to go, you know how, like if you don't eat it instantly, it's just kind of sucks. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I would come in with these bags of food and we didn't take lunches. So of course, everyone's wanting to break into their lunch. Phone's ringing off the hook, and Barry would get so pissed when the phone would ring or someone come in and he would have a spoon or something or a fork and trying to eat his food, and he would just be so animated, if you can imagine it, just his body language and his mannerisms and the way he would act when he was being disturbed from his lunch. He would just roll his eyes and slam it down and be like, well, I guess I'll get this phone. And he'd grab the phone and he would be so animated. And his body language was part of his language and how he talked. And it was so hilarious to see how animated this guy was. Like, you could tell his frustration. You could really tell what was going through his mind just by virtue of the body language and the way he would be very animated and everything. And you saw that in the YouTube videos. If you guys watched over the years, you saw the kind of animated guy he was. But even in his frustration, and look, I don't really want to get into anything that would be personal or anything, but look, sometimes his wife would call the shop, and it was so funny. Not ha funny, but if you know Barry or knew Barry or know Barry in the way that I'm trying to describe him to you and how animated he was, anytime that his wife would call the shop and want something from him, he would get so frustrated. He would roll his eyes and be like, there's that ball and chain again. And he would be, it's just one of those things I guess you'd have to see, but he would be so upset if he knew that he had to talk to somebody. It was just like, he was such an introverted guy and he had such a sort of extrovert's job. Like working at a gun store, you have to be kind of a people person. You got to be a little bit of a bartender, right? You have to talk to people. You have to engage with people. And Barry was such an introvert. And it's so funny because everyone sort of views him as this extroverted kind of guy that was outgoing. And he had this flamboyant nature about him. Like, he would do the costumes and he would dress up and he would make these characters. And he always had these characters in his head floating around, these voices in his head, like the crazy stuff, right? And everyone would think, oh, he is such an extrovert, but no, he was actually very kind of quiet, introverted, centrally, closed in kind of person, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, those little things are just little flourishes that, I'm sure anyone who was ever around him would agree with me and know exactly what I'm talking about. But what about some sort of exact story? So one day I go pulling up to the pawn shop. Now this one's a little bit morbid, okay? So I don't want anyone to get weirded out here, but this can show you sort of exactly the kind of person Barry was. And look, this is really morbid, okay? And this, all the people that happened with this, they are all deceased now, so I can say this. It's fine or whatever, but look, this is going to give you an idea of how morbid his sense of humor was. And look, I'm going to probably end up laughing, and I want you to know that there's nothing funny about this. However, at the time, it wasn't funny, but looking back on it, it was like, wow, Barry. I go pulling up. So Barry was usually always the first person to get to the shop. All right, so he would always be there waiting when I pulled in, and usually I was the second person to show up. Sometimes the other gentlemen that worked there would show up before me, but on this particular day, I got there. I was the second person there, and Barry was already there. And usually Barry and I would have our little exchange in the morning before anyone else would get there. So that was kind of our little tradition. He would get there first, I would get there shortly after, and we would sort of banter and joke around in the parking lot before anybody showed up. Well, this particular morning, I show up, and Barry, in Barry fashion, he's just mulling around outside his vehicle, walking around, talking to himself, just typical Barry, okay? And I walk over and I was like, hey, Barry, what's up, man? And he goes, oh, nothing. There's just a dead guy over here. What? Barry? Did I hear you correctly? You said there's a dead guy over here? Did I hear that right? yeah, in that car over there, there's a dead guy in the car. And he was so it's not funny, but he was so nonchalant about it in this crazy morbid way. There's nothing funny about it, but the guy was so nonchalant about it. Like he was just discussing finding a dollar on the ground or checking his mail or whatever. Like he was just describing any other random thing going on in the world. He was so nonchalant about. So sure enough, I'm like, what are you talking about, Barry? You pulling my chain? It's just the way that he went about it. There's no way anybody could believe that, right? So we walk over, and yeah, sure enough, dead man in one of the vehicles. So Mr. Moss had all sorts of cars on his lot because he dealt in the car business as well. So he had some vehicles on his lot. And apparently, the story ended up being, as we found out later, this gentleman was supposed to be on some behavioral meds and wound up getting off his meds, getting lost. And it was very cold outside, extremely cold. It was like 18 degrees the previous night. And apparently, this gentleman decided to take shelter in the car to try to stay warm. And he was off his meds, and it ended up being that he had some behavioral problems or mental problems and was off his meds. And the family had lost this gentleman. It was an older gentleman. And the family had lost their family member. And this guy decided to take refuge in the car to try to stay warm, and unfortunately froze to death, apparently, overnight, or passed away from some combination of not having his medicine. Anyway, I never really looked too strongly into the details, but that was sort of the gist of what I got about that. But anyway, the point was, I opened the door, and sure enough, there's this guy passed away. I mean, he's very dead. And I'm like, well, dang, Barry, you didn't lie. And I'm like, have you called the police? Or, like, well, you're just gonna hang out by your car like it's a normal morning? He's like, yeah, well, we should probably call the police. I'm like, Barry, it's not funny, but at the same time, it's just his nonchalant manner in which he handled this extremely crazy situation. It's pure Barry. It goes to show the kind of just craziness, just how crazy Barry really was in terms of how nonchalant you could be about death. And again, talking about death and these morbid things, and when I say morbid sense of humor, Barry, he would always discuss these morbid things, and he would just be so elated and laugh about it. And he just thought it was so funny. So listen, I probably shouldn't tell you this, okay? But in the name of us having a good time and getting a good laugh and you guys getting to know the kind of guy that Barry really was. So one of our traditions after we were done filming every night, a lot of times the owner would still be closing the store up. We would close after the fact and then set up the cameras, knock out a couple of videos in the evenings just for fun and everything. Well, then when we were done, usually he would want to pull up on the computer and pull some videos up on the internet. And he liked to pull up those shock websites. I'm sure you're familiar with places like Ogrish or LiveLeak or Rotten.com. Now, some of you all from the 90s, y'all remember those websites, right? The shock websites where you can find the sort of crazy things, the underbelly of the internet, if you will, okay? Let's just leave it there. I'm gonna tell you not to go check out those sites. I don't even know if they exist anymore, but you know what I'm saying. Some of the LiveLeak is a big one, right? Where you could find morbid stuff, where you're not gonna find a video like that on YouTube or something like that, right? Barry liked to go on those websites and pull up really crude, random, awful videos, and he liked to watch accidents and things like that. Well, and of course, he would just pull up a video of some misfortune. And, I could understand where the reaction might be, oh my God, look what happened. Or, holy crap, that had to have been bad. Have some empathy for what's going on. But Barry would just laugh a lot of times. He would just, like, Barry, that's not funny, bro. Like, what the hell? Well, anyway, one video always comes to mind. And I'm probably going to get kicked off the internet for saying this or whatever. But you know what? Hey, we're this far down the rabbit hole. We might as well go ahead and tell this story. And some of you know this story, and y'all are preparing yourselves for the words that are going to come out of my mouth. And look, I want you to know this is a family-friendly channel. Okay, I'm warning you that there's going to be a few things that you're going to when we're talking about a video like this, you have to understand these are people who are no longer alive anymore. You know, I'm trying to respect their memory, but I'm also trying to be real with y'all and tell you some of the things that went on. So anyway, there was this one particular video that Barry liked to pull up all the time, and I thought it was the strangest thing. It was a video on one of these websites I'm talking about, and he had like the little link saved over in the little thing. He had figured out, he wasn't a very tech savvy person, but he figured out how to like save the little link over there. Okay, well, he would pull the little link up, and I knew when he was going for that little link, I was like, oh God, he's watching that video again. And it's a video of a power lifter. Okay, some of you may have, now it's an older video. I don't know if this video is still floating around or not, but it was a video of a power lifter doing a squat, and he's going down, and when he goes back up, the force from the squat is so extreme that he gets an extreme herniation of the anal variety, if you know what I mean. Okay, I'm not going to give a bunch of detail, but let's just say the guy's butthole blew out. Okay, I don't know any other scientific way to put it, but the dude's butthole exploded right through his freaking singlet and everything, and it's awful, and you know, and it makes this. Listen, I know it's not funny because I like to lift too. I would never want this to happen to me or anybody I'm around, but the sound it makes in the video, it makes the sound is so awful. And you're like, oh my God, like the reaction that you get when you watch this video is just, you're just taken aback. You know, those videos where you go, and it shocks you. Well, Barry would watch this video, and all he would do is laugh gutturally loud. And he would say, look at that weightlifter's butthole blow out. And he'd be like, can you believe that? And he would laugh. And we would all be in the shop and just looking at Barry like, bro, I mean, we know it's funny to you, but you've watched this video like 500 times in the last 2 weeks, man. Like, we could maybe find something else to laugh about, but bro. So it became this tradition. Okay, we would finish filming, and then Barry would hobble over to the computer, pull up the weightlifter butthole blowout video. Oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying that. But he would pull this video up, and that would be sort of like the little coup de grace that just sort of polishes off the intensity of the day. And there it was. So, you know, that story always kind of bounces back as being just a memory of Barry that, you know, like, there's some things that maybe I never really wanted to discuss. I knew about some of these things for a long time, but I thought I would share the story because I did share it on social media the other day, and so many people were getting a kick out of it. And they're like, man, you should share some of the other random things that you've been through with Barry over the years. And look, I will mention too. So you notice I'm wearing German Flecktarn camouflage, okay? I chose to wear this particular top because Flecktarn was Barry's favorite camouflage. So he would always wear Flecktarn camouflage in the winter. So I wanted to wear this. This is also a little fact about Barry. He loved Flecktarn. Anyway, so there are some other stories I could share, but I have to be careful some of the level of stories that I've shared, because the last thing I want to do is, you know, I would never want to, you know, paint a picture that would change someone's opinion of Barry in some sort of negative way or whatever. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything that I've been through with him that anyone would think of as being negative. I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm saying is that, you know, let's just say some of the things that Barry liked to do. Okay, look. I can iterate on this a little bit, like the zip guns. Like he used to like to make the slam fire guns and things like that. So Barry was really into this whole idea of, you know, making your own guns, and there's nothing wrong with that. We've published a lot of that content where we've made our own slam fire guns and zip guns and things like that. And of course, you know. We've done plenty of that on the channel before, but remember when we did the bump board and we did all those sorts of things? So Barry was always coming up with these little anarchist cookbook type of things that he liked to kind of play around with. Okay, so let's just say that there are other projects that we've messed with before that never found their way into videos. Not to say that there's anything unscrupulous or whatever, but some things that I probably would rather not talk about, and there's a reason that some of those things didn't find it in the videos, and we're just going to leave it at that. But Barry was always playing around. Let's just put it that way. He liked to poke the bear. He liked to, come up with things and make things. And he was a very astute person in that regard. He liked to kind of, thumb through the pages and come up with some random things to do. So, always coming up with costumes, and he would come into work sometimes dressed in a certain way, and we'd be like, "Oh, what's up, Barry?" And he's like, "Oh, well, later we're going to make a video about blah blah blah." So he would always be thinking of these things in his head, like a costume he would want to put together and wear. So he was almost kind of an exhibitionist in a way. Like he liked to, show off and kind of peacock and dress up, and he had these characters in his head and these narratives in his head, and he was a very intelligent and scholarly person. You know what I mean? And I think that a lot of people think of Barry as just being this, kind of crazy Uncle Redneck guy. And yeah, he had this crazy uncle side that certainly was crazy in a word. But he also had this very deep side that I think that a lot of people never were able really to fully appreciate how deep of a guy Barry really was, and how in his thoughts he always was, and how smart he really was. Barry was a very smart guy, and lots of good practical knowledge, but also some sort of esoteric things that you would think, "Wow, Barry, that's a pretty deep observation." And he would be like, "Yeah, man," and you know how he was. And he was a very, very smart guy, and in a lot of different ways too. And I really enjoyed my time with Barry. He was a really good friend of mine, and I hate what happened, and obviously I've chosen over the years not to talk about any of these things overly much, because I wasn't really ready, to be honest with you. It didn't seem like a good time to bring things up or to talk about the past. And sometimes when you lose somebody, you almost have to just let the sleeping dog lie for a while, and then one day you wake up and you realize, you know what, maybe it's okay to talk about some of these things in a little more detail, and because people might want to know. And I remember reading through some of the comments the other day, and I thought, you know what, a lot of people are asking about Barry. Maybe I'll make a little video where I give some little secret insider stories and things that maybe many of you didn't know. And there are some people I've told the story to before, or these stories rather, and some people participated in these events themselves, and they know who they are. But overall, there are more stories. Maybe I will share more. I don't know yet, but there are some other funny stories that I could share. I probably won't share any more for today. I want to see what you guys think about this video. Let me know. I can make more of these if you want to hear more stories. We can go. I mean, look, those of you that knew him, you knew that he was a cornucopia of random emotions and mannerisms and thoughts, and a very deep person, very in his head all the time. So if you knew him like I did, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, let me know if you like this video, and let me know what your favorite memory was of Barry on the channel. Some of the funniest Barryisms that you ever saw. Personally, my favorite Barry character is the Arthur High Point suit. Okay, I like the garbage can suit that he made to torture test the High Point, which that's gold, if you ask me. When I look back on everything that I did in my YouTube career and everything I continue to do, the High Point suit always comes back as being just like, wow, what are we doing here? It was so outlandish that it made sense. And I tell you, that was my favorite moment, was the Arthur High Point suit, Sir Arthur High Point. But let me know, what was your favorite Barry character? What was your favorite Barry moment? Let me know in the comment section below. I would love to know. Thank you all very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.